and welcome to the final event of the 6th International Writers Festival at Mishkenot She'ananim. I hope you've enjoyed and been enlightened and maybe challenged by the events you've taken part in over the last few days. 7 Minutes in Heaven is an adolescent kissing game, supposedly invented in Cincinnati, Ohio in the 1950s. But no one I know from the state of Ohio, the state in which I grew up, has ever heard of that game. And yet, here in Israel, everyone knows the game and seems to have played it in their teen years. The gist is that two of the young people playing the game have to sit alone in a closet for 7 minutes of kissing or perhaps intimate chatter, or maybe just quietly breathing in mortified silence the scent of wool coats and swatting at dry cleaner bags. Intimacy, of course, is the point of it, and so it is with our own version of 7 Minutes of Heaven in which we have asked our writers here today to talk to us as though each of us is sitting with him or her in a dark closet, just the two of us. In keeping with today's theme, I've asked our storytellers to give me one fact about themselves that's not usually included in their public biography, and I'll share those facts with you as I introduce them. So everyone, I invite you to forget that it is broad daylight on a Friday Jerusalem. Forget that there are no coat sleeves in your faces, and lose yourselves to that suffocating intimacy of the closet and to being an adolescent once again. We're joined here today by an icon of the Israeli music scene, Asaf Amdulsky. Asaf is a singer, songwriter, and music producer. He can play a dizzying variety of instruments and has had a dizzying number of hit songs and albums, and has also been music producer for several films, winning an Ophir Award, which is our Oscar, for Lost Islands. He's going to start us off today with a very intimate Yekirati, and what I can tell you about him is that in his life until 2 years ago, he never ever wore shorts or sandals.
Correct.
Asaf Amdulsky.
יקירתי, יקירתי, חמקתי מבין זרועותייך 3 שבועות שהתארכו עד למאות, אך במהרה אשוב אלייך יקירתי, יקירתי. חמקתי מבין זרועותייך רפה ותשוש 3 שבועות היו דרושים לי עד לאין שיעור, אך בסופם במהרה אשוב אלייך. בקרוב את תדברי אליי שוב, וגופי ירגיש את חומך ואת נשימותייך. בקרוב את תדברי אליי שוב, וגופי ירגיש את חומך ואת נשימותייך. אשוט אלייך כמו ספינה, כמו רוח איתנה אבוא לראות, כן בוא אבוא ובמהרה עטו בניצחון אשוב אלייך. בקרוב את תדברי אליי שוב, וגופי ירגיש את חומך ואת נשימותייך. בקרוב את תדברי אליי שוב, וגופי ירגיש את את חומך ואת נשימותייך. בקרוב את תדברי אליי שוב, וגופי ירגיש את חומך ואת תודה רבה.
Asaf Amdolsky. I just realized I can add to my own personal bio now that I appeared with Asaf Amdolsky. Our first storyteller today is Ruth Gilligan. She's an Irish novelist and journalist who now lives in the UK and teaches writing at the University of Birmingham. She's published 4 novels and was the youngest person ever to hit the #1 spot on Ireland's bestseller list. She's married to a former Olympic fencer, and from the age of 12 starred for 4 years in Ireland's national soap opera, Fair City. Ruth Gilligan, please. A quick reminder to Ruth and all of you, 7 minutes. I'll start just gently pushing you off your chair if you don't manage the time.
Thank you so much. Okay, friends, listeners, fellow closet dwellers. For the next 7 minutes, I am going to tell you a story. And in theory, I should know a thing or two about stories because, as Evan mentioned, I actually write them for a living. And every time I start a new one, every time I create a new character, I'm always thinking, okay, who is this person? What is their backstory? Who are their parents, their siblings? What are their family secrets? So today, I'm going to tell you a little bit about my backstory, my parents, my siblings, my family secrets, some of which I haven't really told before. So on the face of it, we are a pretty typical Irish family. We've got a mom, a dad, a son, and a daughter. But yeah, not like 7 kids, because that's not actually a typical Irish family, despite what people think. There's just the 4 of us. So we seem like a pretty normal, average family. But there's actually 3 different ways in which my family is not quite as typical as it first seems. 3 little quirks that makes us a little bit different. And the first of these quirks was revealed to me pretty much from birth. I've known about it always. The second quirk I discovered when I was about 10 years old, and that was because the laws in my country changed, and this revealed something new to me. And the third reason that my family is not quite as typical as it first seems was only revealed to me a couple of years ago. And I'm still kind of trying to get my head around that fact, and maybe you guys will be able to help me. So the first reason my family is not quite as typical as it seems is that although there are 4 of us, as I said, I've got a mom and a dad and a big brother called David, but for as long as I've been alive, I've been aware that technically David is only my half-brother. So my mother was married to another guy, and at the age of 26, she had my brother, David, and 2 months later, her husband passed away. So at the age of 26, she was a widow with a child, which is kind of incredible for me to think about, and especially when I turned 26, just trying to get my head around that was kind of crazy. But fortunately, a few years later, she met my dad, and then a few years after that, they had me. So, you know, David and I are, for all intents and purposes, we're brother and sister. But apart from the fact we have different surnames, so he kept his father's last name out of respect for the man he never really knew. So, you know, we're very close, we're very tight, but we do actually have different last names. So that's fine, I've always known about that. It didn't really change anything at all, to be honest. And then I turned 10. And my parents sat me down one day and they said, Ruth, we have something to tell you. We're not actually married. So I said, go on. And it turned out that not only had my mother been married previously to her late husband, my father had also been married previously. But Ireland, as a Catholic country, only legalized divorce in 1996. So at this point, in 1998, my father had only just managed to divorce his first wife and was now going to marry my mother. So they were telling me this. And I remember this moment so clearly, and I remember having two distinct reactions. The first was, shit, this is very confusing. And the second was, shit, what am I gonna wear? So thankfully, an outfit was procured, and we had a big wedding, and it was wonderful and marvelous, and you know, things carried on as they had always been, really. And then there's the third reason my family is not quite as typical as it first seems. And this, as I said, was only revealed to me a couple of years ago. My parents sat me down and said, we've something to tell you. And I said, this feels familiar. Here we go again. And they explained to me that my father, not from his previous marriage, but from a previous relationship, actually has a daughter. And although they hadn't maintained contact over the years, recently this woman had got in touch with him, and they were now back in contact and have now started building a relationship and seeing quite a lot of each other. So technically, I have a sister. And you could argue she's only my half-sister, but then you could argue David is only my half-brother. So, you know, what do these words even mean? So this was something, it was quite a surprise, as you can imagine. And I was trying to decide what to do with this piece of information. And I should point out at this stage that as a novelist, this kind of thing is gold, right? This is like your big plot twist. This is where things get interesting. This is just when your book is kind of hitting a lull, boom, you've got a new edition, and you know, the possibilities are endless. In real life, it works a little differently, right? So I had to decide what to do with this piece of information, whether I was going to contact this woman, whether we should meet. And while I was trying to decide what I wanted to do, I thought, okay, well, my first priority is my father. You know, he's the one who means the most to me in this situation. So I said to him, Dad, what would you like to happen? Would you like me to meet this woman? Would you like us to get in touch? And he looked at me and he said, God, I hadn't even thought about that. So I thought, wow, typical man, hasn't even thought about it. So then I went to my mother. I said, Mum, what do you think? Do you think, you know, Dad would like me to reach out to this woman? Do you think it would make him happy if we met? And she said, God, I hadn't even thought about that. So I had to retract my man comment and realize that my parents and I were just obviously on different planes. And being honest, I haven't decided yet. I haven't reached out. I haven't decided what to do with this piece of information, whether to contact this woman, whether to meet with her. And all I keep thinking is that I know that for sure one day we will meet. And this might sound quite morbid, but you know, there will be an occasion where we will both be there. And that is my father's funeral. And that sounds, well, I think it sounds morbid. You think it sounds hilarious. But that day is a certainty. What happens between this and then, where the story goes from now until that day, I'm not really sure. So, friends, listeners, fellow closet dwellers, I'll keep you posted. Thank you.
Thank you, Ruth. Eshkol Nevo is a novelist with a large readership both in Israel and abroad, and probably the country's most popular and busiest teacher of creative writing in Hebrew. But before he discovered his true vocation and avocation, he wanted to be a musician and tried in vain to play the piano, the violin, the flute, and to the chagrin of his neighbors, the drums. I was watching how much you enjoyed Asaf's performance. You were doing it, weren't you? At the age of 23, he was a lead singer on a single called Too Romantic and is still waiting for a response from even one of the record companies he sent that single to. We're glad, Eshkol, that you found your way to writing, even through the back door.
Well, we were asked today to share a secret, to share something we kept to ourselves. Now, it's kind of difficult to keep something to yourself in this country. And I learned it when I decided to publish one of my novels in a pseudonym, in a fake name. I published Homesick, and it was after Homesick, and I was about to publish World Cup Wishes. I decided to publish World Cup Wishes, Bishalachat Yamina, under a fake name. Now, I told about this decision only to 2 people. That's it. And a couple of days later, I walked in the Rothschild Boulevard. Someone I hardly know stops with a bicycle and says, "Hey, I heard you're publishing a book in a fake name now." So it's hard to find a story yet untold, unrevealed, but I think I found one, and it's about how I really became a writer. When people ask me, when did you discover that you're going to be a writer, I have this kind of poetic answer, but there's a true and embarrassing story behind. And it started with falling in love. I fell in love. Actually, it was in Jerusalem. Actually, it was kind of happening in these Yemin Moshe alleys. I fell in love with an amazing woman. The problem was I was already planning on going to South America backpacking. So I asked her maybe she would change her plans and join me, but she was not the kind of woman that would change her plans. And I found myself going to this backpacking in South America and having with her this conversation. Now we're not going to see each other for 6 months. What is going to happen? So we kind of decided on this no strings attached policy, but it took me about 5 hours of a flight to, there was a connection in Amsterdam, and I remember myself in Amsterdam in the connection. There were no cellular phones and no WhatsApps. I was with coins calling her because I suddenly understood that the no strings attached policy was both ways. So I told her, look, forget about the no strings. We will be together forever, and we will remember each other during these 6 months, and I will write you. So I started writing her, and we're talking about 1995. Again, no emails. Real letters, pages, envelopes. And I wrote her about what was happening during this backpacking journey. But the problem with South America is, maybe some of you know, not a lot happens. You can find yourself waiting for a bus 2 days. So, but I wanted to write her letters. So at one point, I started inventing stuff. And sometimes I would tell her, well, here begins the fiction part of the letter. Sometimes I won't. And I discovered that I enjoy telling lies much more than I enjoy telling the truth. And actually, you know, this amazing woman became my wife. And I became a professional liar. And maybe this story was also not true.
Eshkol, we're all romantics. We want to believe it's true. This is really fun. I feel a bit like a therapist here. I just sit and nod, but I don't get to respond at all. I'm dying to. Samantha Schweblin is a native of Buenos Aires. She's won lots of literary prizes and honors in North America, South America, and Europe. was named a Best Spanish Language Writer Under 35 by Granta Magazine. Her work has been translated into 15 languages. She's been living for the past 6 years in Berlin, where she and her partner, Max, have a restaurant bar in Kreuzberg called Gloria, and which means now that it's been announced, you're going to have lots of business from Israel. Samantha, please.
Hi, Evan. Hi, everyone. Well, I will go directly to the point, to the confession. I steal things. This is the thing. So, yeah. If you lost something these days, this is in the 16 room. Yeah, that was a confession. But I have good reason to do this. So the story, this is a real story. When I was 5 years old, my grandfather called my mom and asked her to stay the day with me. Because my grandfather, I had to say, he was a really great artist in Argentina. He was a painter, but she was not part of the family at that time. I think I didn't even know him. But my mom said yes. So he picked me up, and I saw him from the first time in my life. And he told me, well, we are going to take the train, but without money. But and remember, I was 5 years old, so I said, but Grandpa, if we do that, I think we will go into jail. And he said, yes. And I asked, but if I am going to jail, I am not going to be able to see my mom no anymore. And he said, yes. That's the point. So we took the train without money. You have to know that at that time, it was, 35 years ago, Argentina was a very civilized place, no? And he was, 50-something, maybe 60. But we hide under the seat, and he did this, like, don't say anything. And then someone played the whistle, and he told me, they got it. They got us. They got us. Run, run, run. So we get to the station. I didn't know that the whistle was played each time that you get to the station, of course, but I didn't know, so the train stopped, and I ran away screaming like a crazy, like, I don't want to go to the jail. And my grandfather was after me screaming, run, faster, 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 they're coming. This was my grandfather. But the thing is that this was part of a training. Yes. He asked me to not tell anything to my mom, but since then, up to my 12, each weekend he picked me up and trained me to become an artist. So he taught me to live without money. He changed all my friends and my mentors, and he introduced me to the world of the strangeness. So I remember, for example, at my 6, maybe 7, entering by myself in a house of prostitution. Really, we still think from the antique fairs. He talked with the salesmen, and meanwhile I put things in my pocket of my dress. And he built a big table with his hand, and we put all our treasures there. So it was something really serious, not sold for sale, just to steal. And now a couple of years ago he died, but I keep a small box with some of these things, and sometimes I took some things small just to offer in him like an offering for him.
Thank you, Samantha. I think I'm really jealous about that choice of grandparents. That's quite extraordinary. Asaf, we'd love to hear more music from you. Come on up, please.
Before I play the next song, I would like to say my 7 minutes of whatever. It's not really a secret, but when I was 19, I had a girlfriend who serves in the army. I was not serving in the army yet. I didn't do that yet. Maybe in the future. Anyway, I got to her parents' home to visit her, and this was the first and only time I met the poet David Avidan. He was sitting there with her parents. Her parents were veteran immigrants from the Soviet Union. Her father is a well-known painter, and they were all sitting there in the living room, drinking vodka, and talking, grown-ups talking. And they invited me to join them to drink some vodka with them. So I did. And a week or two previous to this appointment, there was publication of my first interview in the newspaper as the lead singer of my first band, and it was not such a good interview. So her parents and David Avidan, the poet, tried to explain me how I should be interviewed in the future, and what is truth in art, and what is truth in real life, and how I should manipulate reporters and journalists. And I was all the time I was listening, as supposedly listening, but in my head I just talk to myself and say, this is the great poet David Avidan, and you don't know even one single poet. I should be ashamed. And so I nodded and pretended to listen to their advice. I still don't remember their advice till this day. I make bad interviews till this day. But I really remember this guy, David Avidan, who was extremely handsome and charismatic, and only like 5 or 6 years later to this meeting, I started to read his poets. It was the weekend after he was found dead. Like most poets, he died alone. He was found on his on the floor of his apartment after taking large amount of sleeping pills. And so the papers were full of his songs, his poets. So I started to read them and discover his genius. And the next song I'm going to sing to you in Hebrew is his first song, actually. It's the first song that opens his first book. He published it when he was almost my age then. He was 18. He was still a student in high school. And the song is about a special day in a concrete city where nothing really happens, but really a big, big silence. The name of the song, הרחובות ממריאים לאט, the streets taking off slowly. הרחוב היפה היפה יצר לבסוף בדרכו, השלווה אטומה וקשה תחתך כמו חלל לאורכו, והבוקר הלך התפחם מברק יחידי מברקו. אנשים התנשמו בכבדות כמו בטון דהרה עתיקה, חגורת הבטון של העיר הדוקה, בהחלט הדוקה. הקירות הכבדים מבינים משהו ונופלים בשתיקה. על העיר הגוססת בחוץ צונח אור שמש מוחלט, ביום שכזה מן הסתם בבתים שום תינוק לא נולד, אף לא מת שום אדם, ואכן הרחובות ממריאים לאט, הרחובות ממריאים לאט. הרחובות ממריאים אל האור הלבן כמו שטיח קסמים, הקירות שנפלו מוקמים איכשהו אזרחים חכמים, ולעיר אין ראשית ואין סוף וכל המבואות חסומים, וידיך שורות מן הקיר כמו מלמול של אזור ורקרק, ועיניך פורחות כמו פנינים של זכוכית על צוואר הברק, רק ראשך העייף צף באור העמוק ורק פיך שרק. הרחובות ממריאים one of the songs that was published at that specific weekend after David Avidan's death, there was one poem. I confused between poem and song because David Avidan was really, really musical at his writing, and he was always writing notes for musicians to come and to deal with his poems, with his rhythms. So this is why I call some of the times I call it songs. But one of the poems that was published in that weekend was a really, really strong poem about his divorce. And although I was married at the time, I took it as a challenge and thought to myself, I should write a song about separation. And the song, the poem that I read was so strong that I had to write my own divorce song many times, again and again, because I wanted to leave David Avidan's traces out of my song. So I had to write another version of my own song without being accused of theft. So after years and years of trying to write the perfect divorce song, finally I succeeded. And this achievement was really impressive, and I found myself divorced also. So my advice to you is try not to try too much. So this is the next song. קוראים לזה בראשית. מי שנשוי פה באושר מוזמן לא להצטרף אליי לשיר איתי את המילים. ומי שכבר שפר עליו מזלו ונשבר לו הבית, מוזמן אחר כך אפשר לעשות איזה צ'ייסר. בראשית. נכון שהגיע כבר הזמן שנתפזר מכאן, לך מאוחר מדי לסלוח, לי מאוחר להשתנות, לכי לדרכך, אני לדרכי, מה ששלך כבר לא שלי, הרי את משוחררת לכל אחד, ורק לא לי. זמן להתחיל מבראשית, זמן להצמיח שורשים ולהפסיק לרוץ במעגל. להתחיל מבראשית, מלהצמיח שורשים ולהפסיק לרוץ במעגל. בלי לדעת מה בלי טענות לאף אחד, קצת חמוץ לי בלב, זה כואב אבל נתגבר בנפרד, עוד שנה או שנתיים. ככה זה כשמרפים, רוצים לא להפסיד אבל מפסידים. הדרך שלי תהיה אחרת, הדרך שלך תהיה שלך. אחרי זמן ארוך שמנסים, אין עוד מקום להיסוסים. הגיע הזמן לחתוך וכמוך, גם אני רוצה ניסים. זמן להתחיל מבראשית, זמן להצמיח שורשים ולהפסיק לרוץ במעגל. להתחיל מבראשית, מלהצמיח שורשים ולהפסיק לרוץ במעגל. בלי לדעת מה
Francesca Siegel is a British author and journalist who grew up in the Jewish community of northwest London, where she still lives and about which she even writes on occasion. It's no wonder that Francesca became a novelist. When she was 4 years old, she had an imaginary friend who took dictation of her novels. Francesca.
Hi, thank you for having me. This is amazing. I thought no visit to the closet would be complete without a really bad dating story. So mine is a really bad dating story. I should preface this by saying that at the time that this happened, which was a long time ago, maybe 15 years ago, I should not have been dating. So I take full responsibility. I was freshly heartbroken. And I was really just fit to stay at home and watch Friends reruns and eat ice cream on the sofa. And then I'd had my wisdom teeth taken out, and all I was doing was eating ice cream on the sofa. And I remember eating Ben & Jerry's fish food, which has those tiny little chocolate fish in it, and I got one stuck in the hole that they'd taken my teeth out of, and I thought, this is it, I can't stay home anymore. So I accepted an invitation to dinner with this guy who I'd met at a party, and I wasn't sure, I really hadn't spoken to him for very long, but he seemed keen, so I went to this, we went out for dinner, and I was on antibiotics still because I just had my wisdom teeth taken out, so I couldn't drink. And there's a certain breed of English Jew who likes to think of themselves as being more English than the English. And he was very like jolly hockey sticks and very sort of, I couldn't believe that I wouldn't drink on a date. And he was sort of so aggressive about it that I decided not to tell him that I was on antibiotics because I didn't want to explain. I didn't feel like I had to explain myself, you know. And he was saying, you know, he obviously just wanted to order a bottle of wine, and I was standing in his way, but he did anyway. It didn't stop him. And I remember him sort of waving this glass of wine in my face and saying, "Do you think you're anhedonic? Do you think you have an inability to experience pleasure?" And thinking, just, God, when is this going to end? And he went to the bathroom, and I texted some girlfriends who were around the corner in a bar, and I said, you know, this evening is horrendous, but I'm not going to get away. Like, you know, there's still, our main courses haven't come. And then we left, and I'd driven, and he was like, "Oh, good, you've driven, you can drive me home." So now, suddenly, my not drinking became useful. And I thought, well, it's 10 minutes around the corner, and then I never have to see him again. So he got in the passenger seat of my car, and I got in the car, and I put my phone in the dock in the middle of the car, and the screen illuminated with the last message that I'd sent, which was, "The evening is horrendous, but I can't get away." So I drove him home in silence. And the next morning I got an email saying, "Just in case you were in any doubts, I did see your text message, and I will not be bothering you again." So then about 5 years later, I had a column for The Observer in the UK reviewing debut fiction. And it came out every Sunday, and my editor was obsessed with the Evening Standard books column, which came out on a Tuesday. And anything that was in the Evening Standard, he would always sort of slightly bully us to review. And there was one week when the Evening Standard had this big sort of photo shoot, very sexy photo shoot with a beautiful Swedish writer. But she had self-published a book that was so, so terrible. And I understood why the Evening Standard had covered her, because she was very beautiful and very glamorous, and the book was it was porn, basically. And I really did not want to review it. And now I would have stood my ground, but he was very insistent and said, "You have to cover this book. You know, it's been a big thing in the paper." So I did, and I'd never done this before or since. There's so many beautiful novels out there in the world, and they deserve space in the paper, and tearing books to pieces is not good newspaper use, I believe. But he made me review it, and I gave it the review I felt it deserved, which was to say it was the worst book I had ever had the privilege of reviewing. And I sort of let it hang itself. I just quoted some passages of the sex scenes, which made me weep with laughter, although it was not meant to be funny. And then after it came out, I felt horrible about myself for doing it. And then it came out, and that week I was thinking about reviews. And I was thinking, you know, the thing is, we writers, we put ourselves out there. You know, we spill our guts on the page, and our readers, the journalists and readers have the right to review us. That's what we invite. You know, they can go on Amazon and say exactly what they think about us, and we put ourselves out there. But actually, you know, just people going about their lives don't actually invite that type of review. And I was thinking about that date and feeling guilty, and thinking, you know, he didn't deserve to read his bad review, and he hadn't asked for it. So out of the blue, I sent him an email 5 years later and said, you know, I've been feeling guilty, and I'm sorry. And he wrote back the next day a really charming email saying, "It's fine, thank you, apology accepted. It's funny, you've been on my mind this week. I believe you know my fiancé." And he sent me a link to my book review. So, by the way, all these people are traceable, so please don't tell anyone. But it's sort of a comfort to me to know that the two people I have most sort of violently and dramatically insulted have found each other. It sort of contains the damage, you know? So.
Thank you so much, Francesca. I was afraid that story was going to end like Eshkol's, that he turned out to be your husband, but you found someone else for him. Graham Simpson is an Australian author, screenwriter, playwright, and computer data modeler. The Rosie Project catapulted him to international fame with more than 3 million copies sold in 40 countries. But my favorite book of Graham's is A Comparison of Network and Relational Database Architectures in a Commercial Environment. I sobbed through it, Graham. For the record, Graham refused to wear shoes until he went to high school. Graham, please.
Well, I think all that comedy needs to be balanced with a bit of self-indulgent introspection, which I'm about to give you over 7 minutes. This closet game, I had never heard of it either, but I want you to imagine you're 14 years old, the hormones are rushing around in your body, and you've been pushed into the closet by your friends, and then the closet opens and they push in that member of the opposite gender, and you realise it's the autistic kid. How do you feel about that, really? Because what I want to talk about is whether I am that autistic kid, and because we now talk about autism as being a lifetime condition, whether I am that autistic adult now sitting in front of you. Because you might know that I wrote a book called The Rosie Project, which features a hero with Asperger's syndrome, which is now part of the autism spectrum. And one of the most frequent questions I get asked is, by people obviously who don't know me, is, are you autistic yourself? And the answer that I give, and have given consistently, is no. I don't identify as being autistic or Asperger's syndrome, whatever you like, but through my life I had an enormous amount of contact with people who were undoubtedly on the spectrum. I studied physics, I was in the radio club, I worked in information technology for 30 years, and in fact the Rosie Project was inspired by one particular friend. There was no sense that it was me, it was him. And that's the answer I have consistently given up until today. So, yeah. What happened that changed it? I was having dinner with a friend, a psychiatrist, and he was talking about an autistic patient. And he said, this patient drives me nuts because he can't blow his own nose. He sniffs and he sniffs and he drives me nuts. And I had this sudden flashback to me at maybe the age of 7 years or something like that, and my dad saying, for Christ's sake, Graham, blow your bloody nose! And every one of you who's laughing right now is laughing at a disability. Just be really aware of that, because that caused me the most intense distress that I couldn't do something that other kids could do. And at that moment, a whole lot of things came tumbling down. And I, like not wearing shoes to school. People with autism famously, some of them don't like wearing socks. And this stuff, and I started to remember a whole bunch of things from my past which were actually consistent with me being autistic. And I asked myself, well, am I? Because you can learn to mask it. You can learn this. And I asked myself, I said, well, first of all, why does it matter? Well, the first reason, straight away, is all of you who felt a bit cringy about being in the closet with the autistic kid, the first thing there is stigma. And I had a chat with Bill Gates at one stage, and before I went to speak to him, his mind has said, don't raise the A word, as it were. And I did a lot of thinking about why, and there's a short message is they didn't want that word to be in the same tense as Bill Gates because of the work that he's doing in philanthropy. There is, whether we like it or not, there is stigma attached to that word. Not least, my wife is a psychiatrist. I would not like to look her in the eye. I knew it was going to be really tough to look her in the eye and say, I'm autistic, because she sees it in all of her training as being a disability, as being a deficiency, a disorder. And I was pretty freaked out about how that would feel to her. So it mattered to me. Look, it matters because it's part of identity. Identity is something we think about a lot more these days. And interestingly, as a novelist, the question of identity is an interesting one. Am I allowed to write about autism? Or am I appropriating it? Well, nice answer. I'm autistic. No, it's good. But the other one is, I like to be a good novelist who could say, no, I made that all up myself. I'm such a good novelist. Okay, so I started to ask the question. And I basically put it to my wife first. She's a psychiatrist, and she said, Graham, I've known you for 30 years. No way do you have Asperger's syndrome. Shut up and drink your wine. And then I asked my sister, who's known me for 60 years. And she said, yeah, you're Don Tillman, my protagonist. I asked my buddy who I go jogging with, who I based the Don Tillman or inspired the Don Tillman character. He said, no way, Graham. I might have Asperger's, but you don't. And I asked my kids. They just nodded. They said, yeah, Don, good question, mate. So I got in touch. I decided to get an assessment, an adult autism assessment. I got in touch with the guru of Asperger's syndrome in Australia, Tony Atwood, and he said, fly up here and I'll test you myself. So I filled in all the forms, the life history stuff, all that sort of thing. Oh, by the way, one other guy I asked was my dad. I said, what was I like as a kid, Dad? And he says, I don't remember. He could remember all the stuff about when he was in the Navy. He was in his 90s. He was in the Navy, about breaking codes, about doing all that sort of stuff. But no, I don't remember anything about you as a kid. Right. I wouldn't have told you that, but he died about 2 months ago, and I feel I can tell those stories now. But anyway, so I booked the appointment with Tony, but I cheated. Before I went in, I realised he was using the autism questionnaire, the standard questionnaire available online. So I did it myself and self-scored it. And 26 is the cutoff for likely to have Asperger's, 85%, autism, 85%. Sorry, let me get the numbers right. I've got them in front of me here. 26, you're 85% likely. 32, you're over the line. You're there. You made it. You're autistic, okay? I got 18. Not even close. You know what I did then? I put on a little hat, imagined myself at 11 years old and did it again. And I scored 43. So I went to Tony. We spoke. Tony said, Graham, you're not autistic. Absolutely not. But he says, you may have been. And I said, well, I thought this is a lifetime condition. And he said, no, that's what the popular view, if you like, but I do believe people change. So I walked away from this saying, I was and I'm not now, and it didn't feel right. I talked to my wife about it at last. She said, you know, the brain changes. The brain changes, and I realised there was a very traumatic time in my life when I changed countries and in schools, of course, where I went through a terribly tough time over 3 or 4 years, and I think that was the point of change. And I would say now that as a child, I was autistic. As an adult, it's a combination of brain changes and mask, but I guess I can say that I've been there. And I think I'm damaged. I think I'm slightly damaged by it all, genuinely. But that's good for a novelist, a certain amount of damage. And, you know, this morning I got an email from my publisher saying my third book on the Rosie series, which is about an 11-year-old child who might be autistic, has been accepted, and they think it's the best book so far. And I just want to be back in that closet saying, hey, Sharon, Sharon, babe, look, I may be a weird kid now, but this is what's going to happen in the future. You want to kiss me now?
Thank you, Graham. Wow. Great stories we have today. Thank you. Dorit Rabinyan is an Israeli novelist and screenwriter whose career path in fiction became clear when, as a high school student, she caused a classmate to fall deeply in love with a girl in their grade simply by telling him stories about her. Then, as a reporter for the army magazine B'Machaneh, okay, she's going to tell you that story. Right, so I'll skip the rest of it and just
I realized how great standard I have now here. So being the dessert gives you different trouble. So I'm gonna tell you about that time I was drafted to the Israeli army. I was accepted to become a reporter for the Army's magazine titled In the Base, B'Machaneh. I was 18. I was not knowledgeable with anything to do with journalism. I was very much of a pleaser, who I am up until now. I really, really wanted to achieve those skills that would make me lovable and to satisfy my commanders. This is the army uniforms. Everything is. Anyway, I was taught how to ask those 5 questions to create a report and send to interview some aloof, some high senior commander. And I came back and I wrote this report, and they looked down at me and they say, you don't get anything, and they really stressed me. But then they had me somehow being trained by an older soldier to learn the process of writing. And then I went back home and I wrote it. And the thing was, let me just jump to the end. Perhaps I should have started with the end. It took me around a year and 10 months, until they realized that I've been interviewing people who are not alive, don't exist, that it took me a year and 10 months until they had discovered that I've been praised and being celebrated and being so much encouraged, that at the beginning I started with inventing only very few elements of those biographies of those interviewees that I've been talking to. And the more they praised me, the more they were more satisfied with my work, the more I invented, the more I imagined. And then it came up to this point where my colleague from the graphic department was released from the army, and the commander had said, so how about this week we will send a photographer instead of her illustrating your column? And that struck me. That was the moment that I realized that I went far too far. And I wasn't aware. I got hooked. The more I was encouraged for my work, the more I got to self-abundant with the good stories I'm coming up with. And there was all so happy about me. So I started crying, and he said, what are you crying about? He says, there's no way you can send a photographer to take the picture. So I was then kicked from this prestigious unit and sent to wash dishes at some headquarters, and it was like the Devil Island. But it took me around 2 years after this crisis at my military career that I published my first novel, and it came back that in the hallways of Bamachane, in the hallways of that magazine, they say, oh, her first fiction was with us. They were bragging now that I became this literary star, that they were so happy about this coincidence. But it gives you, today I am aware of how much I was teasing this twilight zone between fiction and factual report. But it really had somehow was perhaps my first fiction to be published without me admitting it. Thank you.
Thanks, Dorit. I always think of that story as I interviewed her once many years ago and dragged that story out of her, and I have been telling it to my students ever since, because it's like the birth of a fiction writer. It's perfect. My name is Evan Fallenberg, and I'm the final storyteller of the day. Before we hear one last time from Asaf Amdulsky, who will be joined by the wonderful Asaf Roth, for one last song. I'm a novelist and a literary translator and a teacher of both of those subjects in universities here and overseas. And I also have the privilege of serving as the artistic director of the translation residency program here at Mishkenot. It's held each July, and we have one event open to the public, and I hope you'll join us for that this summer. My fun fact from my biography is that when I was 8 years old in Ohio, I decided to run away from home. So I phoned a travel agent and tried to book an airline ticket to Sarasota, Florida. Try being a parent of that. Before I tell you my story, I'd like to note that in this audience I have friends, I have relatives, I have colleagues, I have students past and present. Not exactly the crowd one should play 7 Minutes in Heaven with, which makes it even crazier that the story I'm going to tell is about having posed in the nude. And not when I was in my 20s and all the parts were looking as good as they ever would, but well into my 50s. So the story takes place in Vermont, where I was on a residency to write what turned out to be my new novel that'll be out in September in New York called The Parting Gift. And it's the first time I'd ever written in the first person, which I had been resisting forever, but this protagonist was having his way about it, and there was no way I could write him in the third person. So I was dragged into his mind and his soul. Very deeply and rather unpleasantly as well. It wasn't an easy place. But I realized quickly that if I resisted it or if I censored him or me, the whole project was doomed to failure. So it felt like extreme risk-taking minute by minute. It felt very dangerous. Both of my sons do all these extreme sports. I've never gone in for that, but my danger is sitting there and writing these dangerous manuscripts. And for some reason, an expression came into my head. I don't know where it came from, but the whole time that I was writing, I kept thinking, writing fiction is self-exposure, freedom, libido. Writing fiction is self-exposure, freedom, libido. I didn't even need to put it over my desk. It was in my head all the time. Now, at this residency, as is true about most artist residencies, the big ones, they come and they send around a photographer at some point to document the fact that these people have been in the residency. Now, I'm always jealous of the visual artists because all they do is pose next to their work and they have these beautiful photographs. And then they come and they take the pictures of the writers. And what do? It's all the same photograph. There's a computer, there's ponderance, but really nothing is going on. So when the photographer showed up in my studio, I went through a long explanation about how I wanted a different author photo, how I was living in this little bubble of self-exposure and freedom and libido, how because in this novel it was so important for me to take a risk and put myself out there and expose myself in ways that were clearly uncomfortable to me, because only in the vortex of that discomfort could I really dare to write the way I needed to. And when I finished that, and I'd completely winded myself, he said, "Disrobe, dude." And then it hit me how strange this was. And as I took off my clothes and saw them growing in a pile next to me, I really couldn't believe what I was doing. It got a little worse. Well, I have to say, it was from the back. I'm not that crazy. But because of the light in the room, he needed me to stand squarely in the middle of the window, which was one thing for him to be photographing the back. It was another thing when I was looking at people passing by the building on the other side of a little river. But I got over that. And you know what? This week at Bar-Ilan, where I teach, a student of mine who's not a creative writer, she's in my creative writing class, but she's a lit major and a very religious young woman with an elaborate head covering on her hair. She workshopped a story that she'd written about a woman trying to express her freedom and her feminism by sleeping with different men and in a kind of exploitative way. And when we spoke and she was quiet, because that's what happens in my workshops. The writer is quiet until the end. I was careful to point out how brave she had been to write a story like that and to bring it to us in workshop. And when she got her chance to speak, she said, not only did I want to write someone who was really, really different from me, but I wanted to push myself out of my comfort zone. And that reminds me of listening to the American writer Wayne Kestenbaum on stage once, and he said, if you don't wake up in the middle of the night thinking, I can't believe I wrote that, then you're not doing your job. So thank you, fellow writers, for exposing yourselves, for scaring yourselves in the middle of the night, for doing the job. Thank you, dear audience, for being our partners in crime. Thank you to artistic director Liron Golod for creating these amazing, innovative programs. To producer Dr. Paulina Stemler and the production team of Orly Abulaf and Aviv David, who keep this whole thing running, pulling the strings, and you never see them. And to the rest of the Mishkenot team, who have really become like family. Asaf Roth for great musical direction, always. And especially to Moti Schwartz, Director General of Mishkenot Sha'ananim, and director of the festival, the man who makes it look easy to combine the demands of creativity and creators with the practicalities, technical, financial, administrative, of running an institution like this one so successfully. Thank you, Moti, for keeping Mishkenot so beautifully at the center of the arts world in Israel and in the eye of Jerusalem, Israel, and the world. So now, thank you. For the last few minutes of the festival this year, Asaf Amdulsky, Asaf Roth performing a song called 15 Minutes. Thank you.
טס מעל העיר, יורה בהם חיצים, פלאשים בעיניים, אוויר במפרצים, שט בתוך זרמים, נעים כמו דגדוגים, חשמל שבאוזניים, צמרמורת עינוגים. דקות, חלילים וכינורות, בסך הכל רוצה להיות אחת שיזכרו, תני חיוך נוצץ, סוף בלון להתפוצץ, ולא כדאי להתאמץ, לא, לא, בכל מקרה. מקצה לקצה זה תמיד מתמצא באותה נקודה, הכתמים ופשטים, הלילות מתקצרים לכאן דבר, בין רכה לרכה, לכמה מתוקה מנועים שקטים, רכבות של מילים חולפות כמו צללים מעליי, על העיר יעלי באוויר, מבליטה שדיים, מסתירה את הפנים, 15 דקות, צלמים ומרפות, בסך הכל רוצה להיות אחת שיזכרו, מקצה לקצה זה תמיד מתמצא באותה נקודה. הכתמים מושכים, הלילות מתקצרים לכף בין ריקה לריקה, לכמה מתוקה מנועים שקטים, רק אהבות של מילים חולפות כמו צללים מעליי. תודה רבה. Thank you.
And thank you, our talented and original host, Professor Evan Fallenberg.